Back with another episode of Taking Inventory. This week, we're super excited to welcome Tyler Dank, CEO and founder of Beehiiv, the newsletter platform. We're excited to get into the nitty gritty. Tyler, welcome to the podcast. Would love to kind of jump in and just hear about how you got to where you are starting Beehiiv and the growth trajectory you're on.
Yeah, for sure. So you introduced me as founder. Actually, I have two co-founders, so they play a vital role as well. In the sense that that is part of the origin. I hired them both at Morning Brew, which is where I was previously. And so I joined Morning Brew back in 2017 as like my first real job out of college. Really interesting, fun role, like very undefined and being that small of a startup, but basically ran the engineering, product, and growth side of things. What that looked like is building anything that would help us grow the newsletter faster. So initially, it was just hosting the content on a website and making the stories shareable. We then created a referral program to incentivize readers to share the newsletter with others. And so that helped streamline growth. And then eventually evolved into like anything product and engineering related. So I was the only engineer on the team at the time. I built the content management system, which is the writers actually typing into this platform that we built from scratch to create the newsletter. Previously, it was a lot of copy and pasting into a code doc, which isn't very scalable for a content team. And then later we built a ad management platform, basically just facilitating the sales and inventory of all of the ad placements that go across our 5 newsletters, be able to track where we were in the process. Has the advertiser submitted assets? Have they signed up off on the copy? Is it integrated into the newsletter? All the way to reporting back how performant those ads did in the different newsletters back to the advertisers. And that was a totally homegrown system that we built ourselves. So that was 3.5 years at Morning Brew. Joined when we had about 50,000 subscribers, scaled that to about 3.5 million subscribers, got acquired by Business Insider. And then, as I alluded to earlier, 2 of the engineers I hired, Ben and Jake, are now my 2 co-founders at Beehiiv. And that's kind of what led to that opportunity.
And I want to get back into the ads part in a second, but you said 2 things that were kind of interesting. And I've heard this on some other podcasts you've done, but so you were like a self-taught engineer. Like, what were you doing before Daily Brew, and like, how did you even like get into this world?
Yeah, so I skipped over a few parts of like where I was prior to Morning Brew. Morning Brew was like my first like real job. At University of Maryland, I studied mechanical engineering, and I initially did electrical, didn't know how to code. Everyone else in my class knew how to code from high school. I never learned that in high school. And my freshman year, I didn't have the work ethic. I was probably more party and fun than like books, library, teaching myself a new skill. So I transferred out of electrical engineering into mechanical. Then fast forward a year, me and 2 friends at University of Maryland wanted to start a tech startup to connect entrepreneurs and startups to different software developers, which then required us to learn how to code. And so it was kind of like a cold start problem of we were right back where we started, where actually the problem we were trying to solve, it required us to teach ourselves how to code. So we took a bunch of courses online on Ruby on Rails. They were actually electrical engineers, so they did eventually learn some sort of coding in classes. But for me, it was a course called 1 Month Rails, which I'm not sure if it's still around, and then a bunch of other like available resources online teaching myself how to code. For 2 years in both our junior and senior year, we basically spent every waking moment not doing engineering work on building this company, which before you have users is really just literally building and writing code. And so kind of self-taught, have a ton of insecurity around being self-taught, especially at Morning Brew when we had millions of readers dependent on the software system that I built. And I think you always expect in school that you're taught the proper way to do something. And because I never had that, I was figuring it out, just like definitely not best practices. There's always like a little chip on your shoulder and insecurity of anytime I wrote anything, like whether that was the proper way to do it. But it's also like a very gritty way. So where I have eventually hired different engineers, some of them are very by the book, super smart, but like there's a proper way to do things. And I'm on the entire other end of the spectrum. I don't care how it works or what best practices is, as long as it works and we get it out the door, we can always make it better later. And so like that is like kind of in contrast with my co-founders, which is why we have a great balance. They definitely outsmart each other on like the best way to build anything. I'm like, we could build the best solution of all time, but if we don't get it to market in the next 48 hours, it doesn't matter. And so that balance has been super helpful.
At Morning Brew, did you end up building a big engineering team, or for like the, up until exit, was it kind of just you and contractors?
I think we didn't use any contractors really, except for like HTML emails. We kind of outsourced a bit, but I'd say we had about 5 engineers on the team. When I left, we were a team of about 35 to 40. So a seventh and eighth of the team was engineering, which I think historically and like stereotypically, a lot of media companies don't have the best engineering talent. Where Morning Brew got lucky or unlucky, I guess you could say lucky, is like one, we are just very gritty. And because of some of our early hires, we're just like 10 out of 10 engineers. Like that was a core competitive advantage where a lot of the other media companies and newsletters were using an out of the box WordPress site and then MailChimp and like using different APIs, but like with either a contracted out engineering team or an engineering team where like they just weren't super passionate about what they were building. For being a media and newsletter company, the tech was like as exciting as we could possibly make it. Like we were building full systems from scratch and there were no constraints. So the classic like startup dilemma of build versus buy. Anytime you go with the buy side of that, you're always kind of constrained to like you need this feature that's mission critical to you, but it may be unique just to you. And your account manager or whatever software vendor you're using might throw it on the roadmap next year. And then you're just completely handicapped in the sense that you cannot do something that you want to do with the constraints you're giving of that platform. And so I've always been, again, probably for better or worse, like very scrappy and on the build side of things of give me 2 months and it's not going to be as polished, but there's zero constraints. When an editor or writer comes to us and they want XYZ feature, it takes time to build it, but not cost. And there's no other constraints and dependencies. So that's kind of how we built the content management system. We looked at other ones and decided to build our own, which was like pretty risky at the time. I was definitely super anxious where I convinced Alex and Austin to give me 3 months to build something from scratch as a self-taught developer. And I wasn't polished enough to even map out like what the constituent parts were. Every day I woke up with the insecurity that I was going to hit that roadblock that I haven't anticipated and just wasted 3 months of work for absolutely nothing. Fortunately, that never happened. We launched it. And then same with the ad network.
And I mean, you talk a lot about grit during the morning brew days, kind of grit for you as kind of self-taught engineer. You talked about it on other interviews. After morning brew, you went to Google for a short stint, and let's talk a little bit about that because that seems almost to the antithesis of grit. You know, they're such a well-oiled machine, but then you start building Beehiiv, and you're hiring people you've talked about that really have that element of grit, right? That maybe aren't as pedigreed, but are willing to work and to figure it out. And you're really open about how you're building Beehiiv, how fast you're launching things and releasing product, and how public you are about being growing the business and the number of users, the number of revenue. So can you talk us a little bit about kind of that experience at Google and what that meant in shaping kind of your experience, but then kind of bringing grit into how you've established what Beehiiv is?
Yeah, I'd say the experience at Google was after 3.5 years at Morning Brew, it eventually became not a mature business, but definitely more mature than like the open space that I had initially, where I could do anything. I could wake up and say, here's what I want to build. And there's no constraints. I am the decision maker. As we started to legitimize the business, I think we are doing around 20 mil in revenue. Like I just saw the writing on the wall that more senior hires were coming. And part of it being me being a bit stubborn and just knowing that I felt that I knew more about the business than anyone else. Didn't really want to have someone from another media company be hired over me. I didn't have a ton of interest in learning from a PM at Vox or Vice to teach me how to do what I've already built here. So there's a bit of arrogance. And then I think I already built a lot of like the foundational. We built the website, we built the newsletter, we built the referral program, we built the CMS, we built the ad management platform. And so like the remainder of like just looking ahead to the next 6 to 12 months for me at that time was optimizing the website a bit, making some things run a bit smoother, but it wasn't like the 0 to 1. It was like the 1 to 2 kind of like incremental changes. So I kind of saw that I just wanted to explore something different. My roommate at the time worked at Google. I love music. And so there was a role for YouTube music that opened up. And just like my career trajectory, it's kind of like I joined as the second employee at Morning Brew and saw that through 40 employees. Google is the complete opposite. It's an extremely scalable big tech business where just seeing how the sausage is made, how they operate, how they do processes, how the tech actually works, and how they run an organization of 150,000 employees is so different from what I know. But I kind of got my startup like checkbox on my resume, and like I just wanted to see what that looks like at scale to the maximum level. I knew that I wasn't going to love it. And it was like pretty apparent immediately that there's just way too slow moving, way too bureaucratic. Things that I had an interest in doing was like assigned to someone else on a different team, or like I just couldn't get the buy-in to pursue different things. So for better or worse, it allowed me to focus a lot of time on like what's next. And so I did my work. I did my work well there. I did learn a few things that I still apply today. So I think process is something that I touched on earlier, where I had no whereabouts of knowing that I should build a product requirement document and actually scope out everything that was going to be built before starting, because you never know what roadblocks are going to hit. Unfortunately, I didn't at Morning Brew. But at Google, there's, I'd say, skews towards too much process, and like the happy medium is somewhere in between. But being able to build a full product requirement doc that's 20 pages of exactly how every feature looks, how it works, how users are going to interact with it, then running it by an engineering team to be like, how would you build this? And just building in feedback in both of those different documents is like an amazing mechanism to get alignment. And so everyone knows what you are building and how it's going to be built before allocating any time and resources. So that process we adopted and still do at Beehiiv. We have a product requirement document that we write. We get full alignment. We toss it to an engineer who's leading that initiative, and then they build out what they think is the proper way to build it. So I'd say by my 10 months at Google, there's definitely things that I learned and things that I now appreciate of how quickly you can move in a startup, and the process related things I think are extremely helpful to like organize and move quickly. So that was kind of my stint at Google and YouTube Music. And then touching on your grit comment, I think, and like I'm a huge fan of this book by the Netflix CEO or co-founder on No Rules Rules, but it's just kind of all about like talent density and how A players like to work with A players, because when you have buy-in from a bunch of employees and people who are very motivated and passionate, having someone who is a B plus player and slows down everything actually just creates like a culture of people kind of resenting that type of person to contribute. And in a startup, everything is so interconnected and dependent on each other, where one person operating at 70% blocks three other people on a different team that are waiting for whatever feature or initiative to launch so we can continue to grow and push forward. So I think in how we've set up our team at Beehiiv, there's a lot of interconnected dependencies. There's a lot of surfacing and being very transparent about what the entire company is working towards and who's owning which piece of it. And then even working the other way. So how does everyone's part, no matter how small it may seem, play into the broader picture of what we're trying to accomplish? And so that's just created an environment where like I don't have to be top down and say like this person needs to get this done. Like they know, because there's 8 other people waiting on XYZ to launch, that they need to get that done before Wednesday so we can launch whatever, so we can then start on this next initiative. And so there's a lot of like subtle things that we've done in building the business to kind of enhance the ability to move very quickly.
Yeah, it's pretty evident. Like I follow you guys on like LinkedIn and Twitter, and like and we use Beehiiv for this podcast newsletter, and like the velocity in which you guys ship it, like it's pretty motivating. Even as like for us as like startup founders, like we've put your blog posts in our Slack, being like these guys are cranking. Like we got to move as fast as them. So like it definitely, I think people notice it. You can like feel it, just like that intensity level that you guys have. And I think it shows in the product. I guess for maybe listeners, like we're pretty familiar with Beehiiv because we use it, but maybe a good opportunity for you to just kind of explain a little bit, just like kind of quickly about where maybe it started, and then kind of like what it can do today, because it's a pretty robust tool set. And then we'd love to dive into some of the ad side of it too.
Yeah, for sure. So right now, Beehiiv helps anyone create, monetize, and scale their email newsletter. We do that in a few different ways. And so where I'd say it's easy to compare the traditional way of doing things, you used to store your web content on a blog on like WordPress or Webflow. If you wanted an email newsletter component, you either copy and pasted it into like a MailChimp, or you set up an API to automatically trigger an email. If you wanted to run ads, it's a separate third-party service or a sales team. If you wanted to run subscriptions and have your readers pay you directly, it was an integration with Stripe that you'd have to set up by yourself. If you wanted a referral program to grow, that was a separate third-party service. And so where we came in is we really simplified the tech stack, where anything you could need and possibly want to scale a successful email newsletter, taken from a lot of our experience at Morning Brew, is basically folded into the single platform. So in 10 minutes, you can launch your website where you have a landing page optimized for email collection. It has an archive page. It hosts all of the individual pieces of content, which is SEO optimized. That same post can then be sent to your entire list, just your paid subscribers, any individual segment of your list that you can create with like different data and attributes that you choose to create these different segments. We have growth tools built into it. So the referral program that I mentioned at Morning Brew, we built directly into the product. Anyone has access to a referral program to incentivize their existing readers to refer other readers to the ecosystem and follow the newsletter. We have a boost network, which is just using network effects to be able to promote other newsletters within the ecosystem. So it's an opportunity for one newsletter to grow by paying $2 per email for whatever newsletters send them emails. And it's an opportunity for on the inverse, those newsletters to monetize by sending leads and emails to other newsletters. They can get paid $2 to $3 per email. And then lastly, the ad network is the other big thing that we're working on, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. But at Morning Brew, I think our largest team, potentially outside of the content team, was the sales team. And sales is everything from inbound interest, outbound sales to every brand who's advertising in different media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, other newsletters. It's the copywriting team to create that content. It's the back and forth of being able to get alignment in terms of like, are all the pixels there? Are the URLs and attributes correct? It's the adding it into the newsletter, it's the reporting, and then it's the invoicing based on the performance of the ad. And for a one-person journalist who writes about sports or politics, or a small team who is creating content around whatever, it's a huge lift to spin up your own sales process and monetize the newsletter. But inversely, if you think of it from the advertiser standpoint, if you know that you're interested in women in their 30s who have a disposable income of what, you could look at like maybe the skim jumps out as a newsletter. Once you realize that like their next available opportunity is 4 months down the line, you look for a bunch of newsletters similar to the skim that you could advertise in. You create a short list. You reach out to all of them one by one. It's not trusted data. Like they're just providing like, here's what our rough engagement is, open rate, click-through rate, other historical performance of advertisements. You make it a slot in a newsletter. If it goes well, then maybe you run it again 3 months later, but it's not trusted source. It's not scalable, and it's very manual as an advertiser. If you are interested in advertising in email newsletters, to be able to say, to the same extent that you could advertise on Facebook, give me women in their 30s interested in lifestyle and fashion, and here's the 20 million people on Facebook that fit that exact criteria. How much money do you want to spend? And that's really what we're trying to do for the newsletter ecosystem.
Can you give us some idea maybe of within the newsletter ecosystem, like is it big writers and big brands that dominate the engagement? Or is it truly like 80% of engagement is people like us? We've got about 10,000 subscribers, which is, we think is a lot, but like in the grand scheme of things, it's not. So like what is the dynamic between big and small?
Yeah, I'd say historically, a lot of the larger newsletters already have that sales team, which I do think we can supplement or replace at some point in the future. But what's great about the ad network initiative is you could have 2,000 subscribers. Odds that a large brand is spending their time going down the list and like jumping out at that opportunity at a newsletter of 2,000 people, like you're just never getting that email like, hey, I want to spend X dollars to get in front of your 2,000 readers because you aren't large enough. But the thing is, like, those audiences are typically so engaged and very niche and actually could outperform on a relative basis some of the larger newsletters. And so what we can do is, yes, as a brand, you could advertise in the 5 biggest newsletters and get 500,000 impressions, let's say, but you could also advertise in 500, 1,000 size newsletters and probably get better engagement. And it opens the door and unlocks revenue opportunities for smaller newsletters and diversifies the spend of advertisers, not to spend $5,000 sponsoring this one large newsletter. Rather, they're spending $5,000 sponsoring 15 to 20 newsletters. So like a lot of the incentives are actually in favor of everyone involved. It does bring monetization down where previously you wouldn't be looked at unless you had 10 to 15,000 engaged subscribers. You can start monetizing much sooner now as a newsletter. And then as an advertiser, it's just much more diversified, much more targeted. And email is like a fairly opaque channel. So if you run a sports newsletter and you have 10,000 subscribers, roughly you have 10,000 people who are interested in sports. You don't know the gender breakdown, the age breakdown, what else are they interested in. So by building the tools and systems as the platform ourselves, we can collect data points because we have a data science team to be able to do and understand who each of these newsletters audiences are significantly better than even they know themselves, and then do it at scale.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like, is this, as you're describing it, like there's a lot of dynamics that are similar to like social networks in a weird way. Like Beehiiv is almost like, it's like a decentralized social network for these content creators. Like, do you start to think of it that way over time? Like when you're looking at it, I guess, do you see it as like one big Beehiiv graph, or is that almost like too macro to like, you sort of get out of like the problem solving kind of dynamic if you think of it that wide, and you just sort of focus more on individual newsletters? Like, is there, I guess, like, put another way, like, did you always see it coming together in this sort of interconnected model, or does that just happen because it's worked so well?
Yeah, I'd say that's been the most fun part of our success thus far, is like that initial like light bulb moment I had in 2020 was this, and like how it's come together. So the fact that we've been able to execute and like kind of follow the roadmap that we had always set out has been really interesting and probably unique. I think a lot of companies take in data points, they pivot, they change based on what's working, what's not working. I think we had a really strong thesis, and it helped that we spent so much time at Morning Brew that Morning Brew became this gold standard in email newsletters, and a lot of people came to us with their problems of, how do you do this? We can't figure this out. And so when we had our thesis that, one, having mostly not technical teams tie together 7 different software systems is not like a recipe for success, and it's very costly. Being able to fold that all into a single platform that is optimized for email collection, growth, monetization is like a very effective way. And I'd say the majority of our users like don't need the most sophisticated advanced integrations. I think a lot of the newsletters that have the most success focus on creating good content. They have a few different growth streams set up and revenue opportunities, but you don't need to over index on like a 3D website that has video integrations and everything else, which I think is where a lot of media companies kind of get caught up with. So that was one thesis. And then the other one is, while there's a ton of hype around premium subscriptions, like there is a subscription fatigue, and it's difficult to have content that is differentiated enough to charge a reader $5, $10, $15 a month, in addition to all of the other content that they consume, whether it's newsletters or media or Netflix or whatever they choose to spend their money on. And so while it sounds amazing as a thesis of we can help anyone monetize their audience directly, you have to have very differentiated content to be able to pull that off successfully. And these newsletters who have real assets and 10, 15, 20,000 subscribers can monetize from boost affiliate ads if they were given the platform and the opportunity to. And that was like the big bet that we took. And we're still very, very early on the ad network initiative. But all signs have pointed in the right direction, and it's been hugely successful today.
And do you view it over time as you continue to add the features that are necessary? Do you see Beehiiv as becoming its own walled garden? I think we have a lot of discussion on this podcast. And James, would love to get your thoughts on this because you are such a proponent of walled gardens if it makes sense for the business. And so, I guess, Tyler, how do you think about Beehiiv between walled garden versus more of an open platform? And James, like as you're hearing Tyler talk about it, like where does your head go?
Yeah, I'd say so some of our competitors don't have an API. You can't host a website outside of their ecosystem. And that really is like a true walled garden with network effects. But you can't, if there's, again, it goes to the build versus buy. I never want to be or put our users in the situation where they want feature X. We don't have that feature on our website, but you can't move to a WordPress custom website because like then you would have to churn entirely off of our platform. So we're kind of doing a dual track, like specifically for the website is a great example. We have websites SEO optimized. It has all of your archive of posts. It has a subscribe page. We handle payments and upgrades. But we also play nicely. If you want to spin up a Webflow site or a WordPress website, we have open APIs. We have an RSS feed. We have webhooks. You can do anything. And so basically, as we are making our website offering better, hopefully incentivizing more and more people to use our architecture, we know it's never going to be for 100% of people. And so giving them the optionality to go to a third party and integrate with our systems has always been incredibly important for us. I think there's always like a balance of, there are so many tools and systems that different companies need for different use cases. And so having the API and webhooks and all of the integrations is incredibly important. to remain an open system. But there's also things around a walled garden. There are clear competitive advantages. So for Boost, for example, which is like our lead generation, there's, I think, a ton of advantages of knowing where the subscribers are coming from. We have like the true IP address. We know whether it's a sketchy source. We then own the data from opens, clicks, other user behavior data to be able to say this is likely a fraud sign up and you shouldn't have to pay for it, versus this is a legit sign up. It came from a good source that you are willing to pay $2 per lead. And we have a high degree of confidence that like you should be paying $2 for this email. That's one example. The ad network as well, right? So if we were to open source the ad network to plug in on MailChimp or SendGrid or whatever, we're then dependent on their reporting, their data. So there's a lot of, I think, inherent benefits to owning the tech stack and being able to say, like, we believe in our systems and our data. We've added filters, we add spam checks, we add a lot of things to reduce fraud. To put that, especially with money exchanging hands, to put that faith in another platform is a risk. And I think some other companies in the space have gotten in trouble with that risk. And it really is kind of like finding the balance. So to answer your question more directly, it's kind of like both. Anything that we view that could be restrictive, we want to give our users the optionality to use a third-party website or use their own landing pages or whatever. Anything that involves with like mission critical exchange of money or other systems, there's like a huge advantage, I think, building our own systems and being able to verify that and be the source of truth to stand by the payments and the decisions that we're making.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense from a pure like ads perspective. It's like, yeah, it's incredible if you can pull this off. If you can get to enough scale where there can be like a Beehiiv ads API that Shopify sellers in a click can like tap into, and you can over time get enough scale where there's an auction, and even you can start doing more like audience network stuff. The thing's a monster, and I haven't heard of anything like that I'm aware of. And also in terms of like keeping it quote unquote closed, like the thing that people forget about open web is it's like a fraud shit show. So like there's no way to like to your point about just like tracking attribution payments, like you open yourself up to so much harm, and people like give the walled gardens a bad rap, like the Snaps and the Faces of the world, not opening up that inventory. But it makes it where like smaller businesses can actually get access to things like trade credit. There's like no fraud in there. You can make sure the creator review isn't a mess. There's no like weird attacks. So yeah, makes all the sense in the world. I mean, do you have a sense, I don't know if you share this publicly, but and I don't know what the right metric is, but like how big, do you guys talk about like MAU or DAO or like some sort of concept of like how big the network is in terms of reach?
Yeah, so right now, as of this recording, we're somewhere between like 15 and 20,000 active newsletters. We view active as has sent in the past 30 days. As far as impressions, we're about 800 to 900 million monthly impressions. So as far as like an email network, fairly large. As far as like an ad network with brands like Unilever who want to drop like $5 million on a campaign, like we probably can't deliver to like the top of funnel brand awareness campaigns just yet. But the goal is to eventually get there. That's also, I guess, what you would say is like the downside of a closed garden is we aren't taking a deal from Unilever to invest $5 million, saying we can only actually service 1 million. But we're going to go to a bunch of partners and other networks and then take a cut on like servicing the remaining 4 million. We have partners that we probably just don't have access to because we aren't large enough yet. And so it's very dependent on our growth. But it is kind of that virtuous cycle of the more advertisers we have, the more money we can pay to publishers, which should attract, in theory, more publishers to join the platform. More publishers joining the platform means more impressions to serve, which means more advertisers who are interested. And from purely the ad network perspective, that's like a huge flywheel that we're working on. The thing is, you also take the risk as not a walled garden, but the approach that we're taking is like we also send emails. We have landing pages. We have websites. Like someone churning, not because of the ad network, but because the website isn't flexible enough for them, is then taking impressions and performance out of the ad network. And so there's a lot, again, going back to like the interconnectedness of everything. We started with, we need to build the best email, newsletter, website combined platform possible because that attracts users, which attracts impressions, which then attracts advertisers. But we didn't launch with we had the ad network in mind, but we didn't launch building the ad network from day one. Like we knew that we had to earn 500 million plus impressions before we even allocated any engineering resources to that. The advantages I think we do have is even though we didn't start building with the ad network from day one, we always knew that it was coming. So the way that we store data and the different systems that we put into place had the ad network serving impressions and clicks and verifying that, and then paying out the advertisers has always been somewhere back of mind with everything that we've built.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's parallels to a lot of stuff we worked on at Snap where like, basically we were on the ad side, and so like we were trying to basically monetize the user experience as much as possible. But then there's the design team, and there's this concept of like estimated organic value, which is like basically we can't ruin the customer experience at all. And so like for that tension you're describing, I think somewhat similar, and in some ways it's the same dynamics of these social networks where it's like at some point there is like diminishing returns to ad load. So yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I guess in terms of like this of like the reach side of it, like do you envision a day where there's like Beehiiv audiences where like Unilever could effectively like target newsletter readers on Roku or something like that? Like so it still can play nice with being kind of closed, but like you guys could get that reach extension out of it.
Yeah, for sure. So that is kind of like the initiatives that we're working on now. The ultimate North Star is like twofold. On the publisher side is you're paying us $99 a month, but we are paying you $3,000 a month in revenue. And like if a part of your tech stack that historically as like an email service provider has been a cost to you, and for a lot of our competitors a very large cost, is now actually like your leading revenue driver and simplifying your entire business, it becomes very hard to churn off the platform that's paying you $3,000, $4,000 a month in revenue, especially when it's charging significantly less and like you're very much in the black on that. So that's like our big KPI North Star in terms of the business from the publisher side. From the advertiser side, I have it on one of my like pitch decks from way back when, but like the big ambitious goal is like as a marketer advertiser, I look at Meta, I look at Google, and then if email's a channel, like Beehiiv should be in consideration. And if we can take 10, 15, 20% of any of these large businesses budget, and it's as easy as the Facebook ad marketplace where you put in the criteria of age, gender, demographic, location, ethnicity, interest based as well, and a bunch of other data we can collect. I think there's a lot of power in having that. And that is kind of like the North Star that we're working towards. The thing is like that is already just such an ambitious problem. And it's like one of 20 things that we're doing at once. We're also making the editor a lot better. We're building automation features. We're building a boost network. We're working on the website functionality. So like that's one, why I don't sleep a ton, and two, why it's like so stressful but so fun. Like there's like that, like the ad network really is our big bet, but like that only works if everything else works extremely well too, to keep these customers around and using the platform, and having enough flashy features to attract net new customers to join the platform as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because if what you're describing is like the only company that's been able to create a sort of what like a distributed ad manager is basically the Trade Desk, and they've done that for primarily like CTV and open web, and their market cap is $30 billion. So it's an example of like, email is one of those places that is so fragmented that if you could actually aggregate it together, the the value that you could create is so unique. And to get that, is it fair to say that like most marketers are probably under allocating their budgets towards email just because the friction is so high?
Yeah, going back to what I said earlier, like if you know that your target customer is X, just even finding the best of newsletters that even make up that audience is very difficult to find. I think email converts really well, which is why we've seen some advertisers continue. Like some of the advertisers at early days of Morning Brew are still investing in Morning Brew every single week, and all of these other newsletters. So like it definitely converts. But yeah, there's a lot of friction to finding the right newsletters. And even that hypothesis of I know what my target customer is for whatever product I'm selling, who are the best newsletters that serve that audience? Like the truth is a lot of these newsletters don't know their audience. At Morning Brew, I'm sure things have changed, but we would run a Survey Monkey once a quarter that got 5 to 10% of the readers to submit. And that is what we created our media kit of, and saying this is who our audience is. Even though 5% of the list converted on self-reported data. And so that's Morning Brew, who's extremely large and like had like a lot of thought put into it. I'd argue 90% of these newsletters have no idea who their audience is, which is where there's like a huge advantage. It's both a downside in the sense that it'll never be as sophisticated as a Facebook or Instagram that can track time spent clicking on this, everything you've ever clicked on, the types of things that you're looking up, because email is a bit more opaque. But because we're investing in this vision, like we have a team that's being able to classify this reader signed up to 10 different newsletters. 8 are sports related, 2 are politics related. They've only clicked on links about the NBA, and they only click on like Democratic related links. And like now, none of those newsletters have like an exact target of who that reader is, but we know as the platform that they're interested in the NBA. They're a male living in New York in their 20s who's also Democratic. And if you do that at scale, I think we can use data in a way to better serve all of the publishers because we know the audience and they don't even need to do the work of being able to annoy their readers on collecting survey data. And so that is like the value prop that doesn't currently exist in email or for publishers, really.
Yeah, I mean it's remarkable because I think Facebook did that with their Facebook audience insights, where it became this huge value add that you didn't know who was on your page, but now they're giving you very detailed information about like in aggregate, 60-40 male female. They're interested in sports, weather. I don't know, but for you to be able to do that could be super powerful and really sticky for your publishers. But I am curious, like I'm subscribed to, I don't know, a dozen newsletters that I actually read, and then probably a dozen that I get and open and don't really read. And I always feel better about reading these newsletters than like doom scrolling Instagram or TikTok. But on Instagram or TikTok, I see 1,000 pieces of content. In the newsletters, I see 12 newsletters, and there's limited inventory. And so, how do you and the team think about and kind of manage that tension between, like, we want more engagement, we want more subscribers, but we want quality subscribers, and competition for engagement is like 2-second snippets on Instagram.
I think that's also kind of the bull case on why brands want to
Mhm.
advertise on newsletters because it's like a much more intentional environment that's much more fidgety and twitchy and like intentional in the sense that you open this newsletter that covers commercial real estate because you have a deep interest in it. And if you can target the right customer profile with the right type of copy, I just did a presentation in Vegas the other day, but the stat that I found online is that email converts 174% better than social media, and it's just because of the medium in itself. So yes, it's competitive in the sense of like there's only so much time. It takes a little bit more time to consume an email newsletter, but that is like an opportunity for the advertiser, I'd say, to get in front of a very niche audience and have their ad copy convert. I'd also say like I think we're still so early in newsletters in general. I think the whole thesis we just laid out of how difficult it is as an advertiser to get in front of the right audience, how much friction there is, the lack of data, the lack of ability to really turn a knob and scale their ad spend. As we can start to surface and solve that problem, I think more money will pile into email newsletters as an advertising channel, which is more opportunities and better competitive rates for these different newsletters. So obviously I'm bullish on email, but I do think like it was very eye-opening to me to see how little data we had at Morning Brew and how much we can get the largest banks and brands in the world to send us millions of dollars based on the limited set of data that we had. My last project I worked on there was actually building out some sort of link tracking mechanism to be able to categorize interest based on different readers. But again, it's like the network effects and like building the system from day or building everything from day one with this final end state in mind has been very interesting. And I think it puts us at a pretty unique competitive advantage.
Yeah, for sure. There's a buddy of ours, a guy named Andrew Cavato, who led measurement at Snap, and he was at Netflix. But he talks about how like the future of all measurement and targeting is going to be topics and contextual, and it's like basically what you just described. And so it's like he thinks that's like the only thing that's kind of future proof. So that's a pretty good argument, kind of think, for a lot of things you're
Yeah,
saying there.
I'd say like that is
Uh,
like the biggest risk and opportunity in the business. I think just building a pure play ad network at scale for email, like it's been done with like Live Intent and Power Inbox. Again, they're a third party that plugs into many different systems. So like the whole open versus close, like we have more data. We know when they're putting their newsletter together, how they're putting it together, how these subscribers are engaging in with tons of different content and like where they're coming from on the internet. So I think there's a huge advantage in what we're doing versus like an open marketplace of like an ad server for email, like that's already been done. And to be fair, done well. They're multi-billion-dollar companies, so there's clearly an opportunity there. I think this business can be massive in just being a huge email service provider with great tools and data and UI. So MailChimp got acquired for $12 billion, and that's just like pure play email. So that's like one opportunity. I think the newsletter ad marketplace is like another multi-billion-dollar opportunity. I don't know, like we are definitely going for a home run here and trying to do both, right? We are trying to build the best tools, the best editor, the best automation features while also building an ad network. And if we can get them to align and both work, like I think it's like a very, very large opportunity. I think for other entrepreneurs listening, I think it's very difficult. It's a very winner take all model and approach, and why we work so hard and like why there's a ton of grit built into it. It's hard enough just to build the ad network or a very good email service provider. And we're trying to thread the needle doing both, which adds a lot of complications and stress.
Yeah, but it is really logical. Like again, I keep go back to Snap kind of in this, like Evan would talk about, like if we build the best creative tools, which is like what they would refer to as like for like lenses and creating images, then it will lead to a huge ads business. And you're basically kind of saying in some ways the same thing. So it's like extremely logical. Even for people who, if you haven't used Beehiiv, like we're talking about the ad side, but they also just make it super easy just to create your newsletter. Like you guys have like AI tool tips to go ahead and help write copy, and like eventually you could use all that data to make that easier. So like it seems extremely logical, and it is just like an awesome product. If anyone, and also just like even for us who were like kind of hesitant to even do a newsletter, it made it so unoverwhelming that I think that's like a big part of it. And but I guess switching gears before we wrap up, just like I've seen a bunch of stuff that you put out on Twitter about how you're like building in public. Just kind of like wanted to get your take for any founders out there. Like, how's that experience been? Like, positive, negative? Like, what's your take?
Yeah, I'm obviously a huge proponent of building in public. I'm actually like doing multiple layers now because I just launched a personal newsletter on Beehiiv and I'm building that in public as well. So for the past 26 months, I've built the company in public. And now I'm trying to scale my own personal newsletter, kind of meta. It's about building the company. But I'm also building the newsletter in public, showing how I am using the different features, what growth mechanisms I'm using, basically my experience from Morning Brew and like what else has worked in our ecosystem, applying that to grow my own newsletter as quickly as possible. I'm a huge proponent of it. I think there's a huge appetite for the same reason people would be listening to this podcast of just learning from other people what works, what doesn't work. I think naturally people are more inclined to follow people than a brand. And I think there's a lot of quote unquote secrets that people don't share when they're having success, which is kind of like the secret sauce of we were at a crossroads and we went with this decision. It was the wrong decision. Here's why. A lot of people don't do that either out of humility or when things are going well, they view it as a competitive advantage and don't want to share. But I think there are so many people interested in side projects, startups, building their own company, business, just like as a category. I think there's people interested in following. And I'd argue that a lot of people that follow me and engage with my content don't really give a shit about newsletters at all, but they're interested in like how we're scaling a remote business or how we're hiring or how we think about different things. And so for me, like the chances of failure are always very high in a startup. Anything you can do to increase the odds of more people caring about what you're doing, or even just top of funnel awareness of what you're building. And so if I talked about only email newsletters, it only attract those people. If I can also tie in startups and building a company, it attracts people who just know about us through the company journey experience, the company building experience. So that's kind of my philosophy around it broadly. What I think it also unlocks is like when the company's going well, one, like we can post about different job opportunities and people know we've run the business very transparently. They know exactly where we are. And so there's always a pretty large influx of any jobs that we post. So we haven't really paid for recruiters much. As far as like investors, like we're a VC backed business. The goal is not to raise more money, but we raised our Series A in 6 days because I am very vocal and transparent about all of the numbers. And so it attracts a ton of inbound of, saw you just hit 5 million ARR, would love to chat. And so there's a lot of people, investors in general in the ecosystem that just pay attention to companies that are doing well. And if you live in secrecy and like kind of behind like, a gate of not wanting to share your metrics or whatever, I think you're just kind of limiting the opportunities where people can choose to engage and participate.
Yeah, I mean, I think James said it at the top of this conversation, but like we look at your posts and repost it in our Slack as kind of motivation for our team to move fast and to that there are teams out there that are moving fast, building companies quickly, making mistakes, and it's okay. And I don't think we're alone there. I'm sure there's thousands of people looking at it, and it's motivating. So from us, we appreciate that, and I'm sure there's a lot of other listeners that appreciate you building in public. But as we close out, want to give you an opportunity to plug anything. Let's talk about your newsletter, where can people follow that? Where can people follow you on Twitter? Anywhere else you are?
Yeah, for sure. Also, one thing just to quickly add, I'd say a lot of the building in public initially came from a lot of insecurity of the early days. So we were entering an extremely competitive space where the standard of signing up to a MailChimp or any of our competitors was here's the 20 features that literally every platform has. And we had 3 of those. And so part of the building in public was trying to build the narrative that we are very engineering focused and will launch features very quickly, which is the reputation we built for ourselves. But that comes entirely out of insecurity because I wanted to give the impression of even if we're missing these 6 features, because we do launch things so quickly, you can count that those are going to come very quickly soon after. And so there's always that narrative of, yes, we're missing these things now, but we're aware of it and it's coming soon, which buys us more time of users who may be frustrated missing features that it's coming, or users who are waiting to migrate over until feature X is available. Just being able to follow that roadmap in real time has been super helpful and truly from insecurity and something we still maintain. Because there's still plenty of things we can be doing better. We get tons of feedback from users. We can basically publicize that we hear them, we know what they want, and that it's been prioritized, and then share it. And then to answer your question more directly, to just promote whatever, one, Twitter is probably my most active channel. So it's Dank, DENK _tweets is my Twitter handle. And then my personal newsletter is Big Desk Energy, which is a Spotify playlist turned email newsletter. Probably the only person dumb enough to parlay a Spotify playlist with an email newsletter, but it's been super fun so far.
I follow it. It's great. Would you posted some like ridiculous article? There's like also there's like the random little like articles at the end are hysterical. I don't know which one it was. There's one that was great. But well, thanks, man, for doing this, and we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. But appreciate the time, everyone. If you're sending out emails, use Beehiiv. It's like pretty obvious.
Oh yeah,
awesome, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.